Thank you. I want to thank Wyatt and Jake and Kaki and Adam and the whole staff. I want to thank Alicia, my workshop teaching partner, and my workshop. Don't hold anything against me. I did my best. Coming back is always a pleasure. I mean, my friends who tend to sit over here, sometimes over there. It's great to see you all again. I hope we can meet next summer. That all depends on Wyatt. I don't want to twist anybody's arm. I don't have any new poems to read because I don't write that much, for one thing. And I usually, between books, 3 or 4 years, 3 years in which I don't write anything. And then I usually do a book fairly quickly. So for those of you who were here last year, some of what I'm going to read, actually quite a lot of what I'm going to read, you probably heard last year. But I'm trusting that you have poor memories. Anyway, they're forgettable. But I'm going to read a few earlier poems, and I had written some down that I wanted to read, but I'm not going to read them. I'm going to read a couple of them. But so this reading is in 2 parts. The first part are what I call poems. Some of you may want to debate that. The second part, I call them prose pieces, but I'm willing to, so many people have said they're prose poems, not that I really know what a prose poem is. I'm willing to accept that. Although, well, I'll get to that in part 2. I'll tell you when we get to part 2. Okay, the first poem is fiction. This is for my friends, fiction writers over here. I think of the innocent lives of people in novels who know they'll die, but not that the novel will end. How different they are from us. Here the moon stares dumbly down through scattered clouds onto the sleeping town, and the wind rounds up the fallen leaves, and somebody, namely me, deep in his chair, riffles the pages left, knowing there's not much time for the man and woman in the rented room, for the red light over the door, for the iris tossing its shadow against the wall, not much time for the soldiers under the trees that line the river, for the wounded being hauled away to the cities of the interior where they will stay. The war that raged for years will come to a close, and so will everything else, except for the presence hard to define, a trace like the scent of grass after a night of rain, or the remains of a voice that lets us know without spelling it out, not to despair. If the end has come, it too will pass. And a friend of mine here, one of my fellows, George Green by name, wanted me to read this poem, Orpheus Alone. It was an adventure much could be made of, a walk on the shores of the darkest known river, among the hooded, shoving crowds, by steaming rocks and rows of ruined huts, half buried in the muck, then to the great court with its marble yard, whose emptiness gave him the creeps, and to sit there in the sunken silence of the place and speak of what he had lost, what he still possessed of his loss, and then pulling out all the stops, describing her eyes, her forehead where the golden light of evening spread, the curve of her neck, the slope of her shoulders, everything down to her thighs and calves, letting the words come as if lifted from sleep, to drift upstream against the water's will, where all the condemned and pointless labor, stunned by his voice's cadence, would come to a halt, and even the crazed, disheveled furies for the first time would weep, and the soot-filled air would clear just enough for her, the lost bride, to step through the image of herself and be seen in the light. As everyone knows, this was the first great poem, which was followed by days of sitting around in the houses of friends with his head back, his eyes closed, trying to will her return, but finding only himself again and again, trapped in the chill of his loss, and finally, without a word, taking off to wander the hills outside of town, where he stayed until he had shaken the image of love and put in its place the world as he wished it would be, urging its shape and measure into speech of such newness that the world was swayed, and trees suddenly appeared in the bare place where he spoke, and lifted their limbs, and swept the tender grass with the gowns of their shade, and stones, weightless for once, came and set themselves there, and small animals lay in the miraculous fields of grain and aisles of corn and slept. The voice of light had come forth from the body of fire, and each thing rose from its depths and shone as it never had. And that was the second great poem, which no one recalls anymore. The third and greatest came into the world as the world, out of the unsayable, invisible source of all longing to be. It came as things come that will perish, to be seen or heard a while, like the coating of frost or the movement of wind, and then no more. It came in the middle of sleep, like a door to the infinite, and circled by flame came again at the moment of waking. And sometimes, remote and small, it came as a vision with trees by a weaving stream, brushing the bank with their violet shade, with somebody's limbs scattered among the matted, mildewed leaves nearby, with his severed head rolling under the waves, breaking the shifting columns of light into a swirl of slivers and flecks. It came in a language untouched by pity, in lines lavish and dark, where death is reborn and sent into the world as a gift, so the future, with no voice of its own, nor hope of ever becoming more than it will be, might mourn. And now I'm going to read a poem called Mirror. A white room and a party going on, and I was standing with some friends under a large gilt-framed mirror that tilted slightly forward over the fireplace. We were drinking whiskey, and some of us, feeling no pain, were trying to decide what precise shade of yellow the setting sun turned our drinks. I closed my eyes briefly, then looked up into the mirror. A woman in a green dress leaned against the far wall. She seemed distracted. The fingers of one hand fidgeted with her necklace, and she was staring into the mirror, not at me, but past me, into a space that might be filled by someone yet to arrive, who at that moment could be starting the journey which would lead eventually to her. Then suddenly, my friend said it was time to move on. This was years ago, and though I have forgotten where we went and who we all were, I still recall that moment of looking up and seeing the woman stare past me into a place I could only imagine, and each time it is with a pang, as if just then I were stepping from the depths of the mirror into that white room, breathless and eager, only to discover too late that she is not there. And I'll read one more of these poems, and then I'll move on to Almost Invisible. This is called the Webern Variations. The sudden rush of it, pushing aside the branches, late summer flashing towards the image of its absence, into the heart of nothing, into the radiant hollows. Even the language of vanishing leaves itself behind. Clouds, trees, houses, in the feeling they awaken as the dark approaches, seem like pieces of another life. One can sift through what remains, the dust of phrases uttered once, the ruins of a passion. It comes to less each time. The voice sliding down, the voice turning round and lengthening the thread of sense, the thread of sound. Those avenues of light that slid between the clouds moments ago are gone, and suddenly it is dark. Who will be left to stitch and sew the shroud of song? The houses back in place, the trees rising from a purple shade. Not too late to see oneself walk the beach at night. How easily the sea comes in, spreads, retreats, and disappears. How easily it breathes. And the late risen half moon, drawn out of darkness, staring down, seems to pause above the waves. Under the moon and stars, which are what they have always been, what should we be but ourselves in this light, which is no light to speak of? What should we hear but the voice that would be ours shaping itself, the secret voice of being telling us that where we disappear is where we are? What to make of a season's end, the drift of cold drawn down the hallways of the night, the wind pushing aside the leaves, the vision of one's passing passes. Days flow into other days. The voice that sews and stitches again picks up its work, and everything turns and turns, and the unknown turns into the song that is the known. But what in turn becomes of the song is not for us to say. Okay, part 2 has arrived. Now, something about Almost Invisible, it varies in tone. Some of what is here, some of these pieces are like riddles. Some are a little bit like fable. Some are something like domestic satire. Some are jokes. some are meditations, and they keep shifting. That is, one sort of thing follows another. I want to read the epigraph to the book, which sets the tone for the book. It's from David Copperfield. "Gentlemen," returned Mr. Micawber, "do with me as you will. I am a straw upon the surface of the deep, and am tossed in all directions by the elephants." I beg your pardon, I should have said the elements. Harmony in the boudoir. After years of marriage, he stands at the foot of the bed and tells his wife that she will never know him, that for everything he says, there is more that he does not say, that behind each word he utters, there is another word, and hundreds more behind that one. All those unsaid words, he says, contain his true self, which has been betrayed by the superficial self before her. So you see, he says, kicking off his slippers, I am more than what I have led you to believe I am. Oh, you silly man, says his wife. Of course you are. I find that just thinking of you having so many selves receding into nothingness is very exciting. That you barely exist as you are couldn't please me more. Clarities of the, I should say that I kept writing titles, and sometimes I would write one of these paragraphs. Oh, they become paragraphs suddenly. Well, anyway, I would write one of these, and I would sort of try to match it up with one of these titles. That's something new for me. Clarities of the non-existent. To have loved the way it happens in the empty hours of late afternoon, to lean back and conceive of a journey leaving behind no trace of itself, to look out from the house and see a figure leaning forward as if into the wind, although there is no wind, to see the hats of those in town discarded in moments of passion scattered over the ground, although one cannot see the ground. All this in the vague yellowing light that lowers itself in the hour before dark, none of it of value except for the pleasure it gives, enlarging an instant and finally making it seem as if it were true, and years later to come upon the same scene, the figure leaning into the same wind, the same hat scattered over the same ground that one cannot see. The minister of culture gets his wish. The minister of culture goes home after a grueling day at the office. He lies on his bed and tries to think of nothing, but nothing happens, or more precisely, does not happen. Nothing is elsewhere doing what nothing does, which is to expand the dark. But the minister is patient. And slowly things slip away. The walls of his house, the park across the street, his friends in the next town. He believes that nothing has finally come to him, and in its absent way is saying, "Darling, you know how much I have always wanted to please you, and now I have come, and what is more, I have come to stay." Now, This is the next one, the old age of nostalgia, is a sickening bit of high romantic. I won't say any more. Those hours given over to basking in the glow of an imagined future, of being carried away in streams of promise by a love or a passion so strong that one felt altered forever and convinced that even the smallest particle of the surrounding world was charged with a purpose of impossible grandeur. Ah, yes, and one would look up into the trees and be thrilled by the wind-loosened river of pale gold foliage cascading down, and by the high melodious singing of countless birds. Those moments, so many and so long ago, still come back, but briefly, like fireflies in the perfumed heat of a summer night. Dream testicles, vanished vaginas. You know, these things, people ask me, where do your poems come from? I don't know. Horace, the corpse, said, I kept believing that tomorrow would come and I would get up, put on my socks, my boxer shorts, go to the kitchen, make myself coffee, read the paper, and call some friends. But tomorrow came, and I was not in it. Instead, I found myself on a powder blue sofa in a field of bright grass that rolled on forever. How awful, said Mildred, who was not yet a corpse, but in close touch with Horace. How awful to be so far away with nothing to do and without sex to distract you. I've heard that all vaginas up there, even the most open, honest, and energetic, are shut down, and that all testicles, even the most forthright and gifted, swing dreamily among the clouds like little chandeliers. Oh well. The students of the ineffable. What I'm about to say happened years ago. I had rented a house by the sea. Each night, I sat on the porch and wished for some surge of feeling, some firelit stream of sound to lead me away from all that I had known. But one night, I climbed the hill behind the house and looked down on a small dirt road where I was surprised to see long lines of people shuffling into the distance. Their difficult breathing and their coughing were probably caused by the cloud of dust their march had created. Who are you, and why is this happening? I asked one of them. We are believers and must keep going. And then he added, our work is important and concerns the self. But all your dust is darkening the stars, I said. Nay, nay, he said, we are only passing through. The stars will return. Oh, this is a line from Walt Whitman. It refers to Whitman. Ever so many 100 years hence, I'm crossing Brooklyn Ferry. Down the milky corridors of fog, starless scenery, the rubble of ocean's breath, that lone figure strolling, gathering about him without shame, a small flood of damages, concessions to a frailty which was his long before he knew what he must do or what he must be, and now with his hand outstretched as if to greet the future, he comes close and pours out to me the subtlety of his meaning, and I see him, my long-lost uncle, great and golden in the sudden sunlight, who predicted that he would reach over the years and be with me, and that I would be waiting. Clear in the September light. See, some people have to get up at 5:30 in the morning. I should say, go, act. Well, I won't. Clear in the September light. A man stands under a tree, looking at a small house not far away. He flaps his arms as if he were a bird, maybe signaling someone we cannot see. He could be yelling, but since we hear nothing, he probably is not. Now the wind sends a shiver through the tree and flattens the grass. The man falls to his knees and pounds the ground with his fists. A dog comes and sits beside him. And the man stands, once again flapping his arms. What he does has nothing to do with me. His desperation is not my desperation. I do not stand under trees and look at small houses. I have no dog. A traveler returned to the country, you can always get there from here. A traveler returned to the country from which he had started many years before. When he stepped from the boat, he noticed how different everything was. There were once many buildings, but now there were few, and each of them needed repair. In the park where he played as a child, dust-filled shafts of sunlight struck the tawny leaves of trees and withered hedges. Empty trash bags littered the grass. The air was heavy. He sat on one of the benches and explained to the woman next to him that he'd been away a long time, then asked her what season had he come back to. She replied that it was the only one left, the one they had all agreed on. The mysterious arrival of an unusual letter. It had been a long day at work and a long ride back to the small apartment where I lived. When I got there, I flicked on the light and saw on the table an envelope with my name on it. Where was the clock? Where was the calendar? The handwriting was my father's, but he had been dead for 40 years. As one might, I began to think that maybe, just maybe, he was alive, living a secret life somewhere nearby. How else to explain the envelope? To steady myself, I sat down, opened it, and pulled out the letter. Dear son, was the way it began. Dear son, and then nothing. Poem of the Spanish poet. I'm running fast here because I have 100 more of these. No, not that many. Poem of the Spanish poet. In a hotel room, somewhere in Iowa, an American poet, tired of his poems, tired of being an American poet, leans back in his chair and imagines he is a Spanish poet, an old Spanish poet, nearing the end of his life, who walks to the Guadalquivir and watches the ships, gray and ghostly in the twilight, slip downstream. The little waves approaching the grassy bank where he sits whisper something he can't quite hear as they curl and fall. Now, what does the Spanish poet do? He reaches into his pocket, pulls out a notebook, and writes, "Black fly, why have you come? Is it my shirt, my new white shirt with buttons of bone? Is it my suit, my dark blue suit? Is it because I lie here alone under a willow cold as stone? Black fly, how good you are to come to me now. How good you are to visit me here. Black fly, to wish me goodbye." The enigma of the infinitesimal. You've seen them at dusk, walking along the shore, seen them standing in doorways, leaning from windows, or straddling the slow-moving edge of a shadow. Lovers of the in-between, they are neither here nor there, neither in nor out. Poor souls, they are driven to experience the impossible. Even at night, they lie in bed with one eye closed and the other open, hoping to catch the last second of consciousness and the first of sleep, to inhabit that no man's land, that beautiful place, to behold as only a God might, the luminous conjunction of nothing and all. A dream of travel. Sorry. Comes down from the mountain the cream-colored horse, comes across dun fields and steps lightly into the house, and stands in the bright living room cloud-like and silent. And now, without warning, the gray arm of the wind takes him away. I loved that horse, thought the poet. I could have loved anything, but I loved that horse. With him, I could have gone to the sea, the wrinkled, sorrowing sea, and who knows what I could have done there. Turned wind into marble, made stars shiver in sunlight. Once upon a cold November morning, I left the sunlit fields of my daily life and went down into the hollow mountain. And there I discovered in all its chilly glory the glass castle of my other life. I could see right through it and beyond, but what could I do with it? It was perfect, irreducible, and worthless, except for the fact that it existed. Provisional eternity. A man and a woman lay in bed. "Just one more time," said the man. "Just one more time." "Why do you keep saying that?" said the woman. "Because I never want it to end," said the man. What don't you want to end? Said the woman. This, said the man, this never wanting it to end. The street at the end of the world. Haven't we been down this street before? I think we have. I think they move it every few years, but it keeps coming back with its ravens and dead branches, its crumbling curves, its lines of people just stepping from a landscape that goes blank the moment they leave it. And what of the walled city with its circling swallows and the sun setting behind it? Haven't we seen that before? And what of the ship about to sail off to the Isle of Black Rainbows and midnight flowers, and the bearded tour guides waving us on? Yes, my dear, we have seen that too. But now you must hold my arm and close your eyes. An event about which no more need be said. I was riding downtown in a cab with a prince. Sorry, I'll say that. I didn't mean it. I was riding downtown in a cab with a prince who had consented to be interviewed, but asked that I not mention him or his country by name. He explained that both exist secretly and their business is carried on in silence. He was tall, had a long nose beneath which was tucked a tiny mustache. He wore a pale blue shirt open at the neck and cream-colored pants. I have no hobbies, he explained. My one interest is sex. It can be with a man or a woman, old or young, so long as it produces the desired result, which is to remind me of the odor of white truffles or the taste of candied violets in a floating island. Here, let me show you something. When I saw how big it was and what he'd done to it, I screamed and leaped from the moving cab. Well, I got to move along here. I'm not sure. Skip some of these. Mystery and solitude in Topeka. Afternoon darkens into evening. A man falls deeper and deeper into the slow spiral of sleep, into the drift of it, the length of it, through what feels like mist, and comes at last to an open door through which he passes without knowing why, then again without knowing why goes to a room where he sits and waits while the room seems to close around him, and the dark is darker than any he has known, and he feels something forming within him without being sure what it is, its hold on him growing as if a story were about to unfold, in which two characters, pleasure and pain, commit the same crime, the one that is his, that he will confess to again and again until it means nothing. In the afterlife, she stood beside me for years, or was it a moment? I cannot remember. Maybe I loved her. Maybe I didn't. There was a house, and then no house. There were trees, but none remain. When no one remembers, what is there? You whose moments are gone, who drift like smoke in the afterlife. Tell me something. Tell me anything. With only the stars to guide us. I don't think I've ever read this one before. You'll probably discover why. Whenever the giants turned in for the night, taking their huge toys with them, we were left with nothing to play with and slept under sofas and chairs. The gift of bigness would never be ours. This was a truth against we had tried again and again to turn our tiny backs, and each time had failed. Undone by sorrow, some of us found solace in prayer, and others, like ourselves, chose to follow wild dogs through the dark, moose-crowded woods of the Northland, nursing their hurt until they dropped. The Social Worker and the Monkey. Once I sat in a room with a monkey who told me he was not a monkey. I understood his anguish being trapped in a body he detested. "Sir," I said, "I think I know what you are feeling, and I would like to help you." "Treat me like a monkey," he said, "it serves me right." Those little legs and awful hands. Night had fallen. A man who was staying at the Grand Hotel walked to the beach, lit a cigar, opened the black umbrella, and leaned back in a canvas beach chair, holding the cigar in one hand and the umbrella in the other. I wanted to ask him why the umbrella, but I was too timid. Then I heard him say, "Those little legs and awful hands, will I never be rid of them?" I patted my legs, then looked at my hands, and knew that he had not meant me, and certainly not himself, but maybe another, someone he might have hated or even loved. But down the beach, a woman wearing very large mittens was coming toward him, rapidly, with baby steps. He jumped up from the beach chair, tossed his cigar, and with his umbrella began to run. He ran and ran, trying to escape, as if he could ever escape. Mary Jo introduced you to this poem very smartly and elegantly, I thought. Nocturne of the Poet Who Loved the Moon. I've grown tired of the moon, tired of its look of astonishment, the blue ice of its gaze, its arrivals and departures, of the way it gathers lovers and loners under its invisible wings, failing to distinguish between them. I have grown tired of so much that used to entrance me, tired of watching cloud shadows pass over sunlit grass, of seeing swans glide back and forth across the lake, of peering into the dark, hoping to find an image of a self as yet unborn. Let plainness enter the eye, plainness like a table on which nothing is set, like a table that is not yet even a table. And lastly, when I turned 100, I wanted to go on an immense journey, to travel night and day into the unknown, until, forgetting my old self, I came into possession of a new self, one that I might have missed on my previous travels. But the first step was beyond me. I lay in bed unable to move, pondering as one does at my age, the ways of melancholy, how it seeps into the spirit, how it disincarnates the will, how it banishes the senses to the chill of twilight, how even the best and worst intentions wither in its keep. I kept staring at the ceiling, then suddenly felt a blast of cold air, and I was gone. Thank you. Thank you. Number 5.